All right, let's meet our panel. Joining us now is retired U.S. Navy Captain Gary Tabach. He's a former Chief of Staff of NATO in Moscow. We also have Joel Shalit with us, the editor-in-chief of The Battleground, and our very own I-24 News senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. Okay, so we are going to start with a quick fire round. Each of our guests are going to have 30 seconds to respond to my first question. Are you ready? Is Trump right that Europe has freeloaded and grown strategically weak? Joel, take it away.
Yes, in so many words, the European Union member states that are part of NATO have relied too much on the United States for too long for security purposes.
All right. Gary, what is your take on this?
Yes, absolutely. And President Trump has spoken about it to the European Union and to NATO about 6 years ago when he was saying, listen, you want us to pay to protect you from this KGB thug that is in your neighborhood. Meanwhile, you're not paying your dues into the NATO and you're freeloading on us, just like the United Nations.
Owen, I'm interested to hear what you have to say to this question.
Agree with both of them on that, Natasha. But on the broader question of what Trump has said, look, on the narrower point on migration, when he's taking on the Europeans, he's wrong, or at least wrong to be using that on a foreign policy level against Europe rather than leaving it up to their own voters and their own parliaments. But on the wider level, as usual, Trump is right that just because it's important to have a transatlantic relationship doesn't mean it's important to have it at all costs. And Trump is right to make demands of the Europeans on a range of issues, especially on the issues that are really important to the U.S. geopolitically and economically.
All right, we are now going to turn to our open panel. That means that each of our panelists have the freedom to interact. You can speak your mind, say whatever you have on, to say. But let's start with the next question. Actually, first I want to ask, do either of you want to respond to one another? Joel?
To pick up from what Owen just said, I think the major danger of Trump's criticisms of a lack of European investment in defense have to do with coupling it with a critique of civilizational decline in the EU. The European Union and European Union member states have been very loyal to the United States over the decades and have cooperated with the U.S. extensively on security issues. They simply haven't invested the same way the United States has. And that's a big difference. I mean, Trump, in my opinion, has declared ideological war and sued for ideological divorce from the EU. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a shout out to far-right European parties. It has nothing to do with empowering Europe to take defense matters vis-a-vis Ukraine into its own hands.
Oh, and I see you nodding there. You have something you want to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, to continue on these points, look, Natasha, I don't think the U.S. really has a dog in the fight on how many migrants from Muslim countries or otherwise the Europeans decide to admit or not admit. That's up to their own voters, up to their own parliaments. Donald Trump can have his own opinions about it, but it's not really an American national interest. But there are some things that are. Of course, the issue of defense spending. And there, Donald Trump has a lot to be proud of. He's a real achievement, it seems, where his predecessors talked a good game but didn't actually get to the finish line the way he seems to have gotten in terms of getting NATO members to spend 5% of their GDP potentially on defense. But there are also other issues. Trade, where Trump has tried and in large case succeeded to drive a hard bargain. And of course, the issue of China, where it's going to be more important for the United States to keep Europe on its side. But maybe to do that, there has to be a give and take on other issues. Point being, Natasha, that Trump is right to press the Europeans to get them to do more, to align themselves with what's important to the United States rather than giving the kind of blank check that would have been appropriate in 1945 when Europe was destroyed, but doesn't make a lot of sense in 2025 when Europe's really back on its feet and has been for a long time. But now there is a point where the U.S. has to drive a hard bargain, but not on migration. That's a distraction. There are some other issues that are going to be a lot more important to the U.S. moving forward.
I want to focus on migration shortly. Sorry, I heard that somebody wanted to speak.
Well, the thing is, I think that Europeans, Israelis, and Ukrainians have to remember that President Trump is the president of the United States, not of Europe or Israel or Ukraine. Europe right now has a major war going on right in their backyard. And the United States has been supporting the Ukraine for the last 4 years. And President Trump says, listen, Europe has to engage in this. We can't pay and fight for you all the time. So Europeans agreed to pay for the arms that will be transferred to Ukrainians who are really bleeding out. to this KGB thug, and Europeans are not really pulling their weight. They're not paying for it. And again, American citizens are saying, listen, you won this election on saying that you're going to make America great again. And I can assure you that many Americans think that if America is great again, then Europe is going to be great again, and Ukraine will be great again. But the thing is, Europe is concentrating on bringing foreign army that's invading them, that is draining, and they're paying for it, for this migration, as you were saying. That is a foreign body. Those are not people in Europe who will fight for Europe. And this is a concern for the United States, that we're not willing to pay for it any longer. We have our own problems.
You know, it's important to note that we're seeing a lot of European leaders who are very angry about Trump's commentary. Do you think that he is ultimately being critical because he wants what is best for Europe? Is this an effective strategy, the perhaps wording of what he is saying in terms of Europe's performance as of late? Gary? Yeah,
listen, we're in the United States, we're very tired of this political correctness, that President Trump said this, President Trump said that. It almost becomes a joke about it, especially when it is misinterpreted. It's taken out of context. For instance, this picture that is circulating everywhere, including in your channel, where Trump is standing with women whose faces are blocked out. This is already a very famous picture that's been in the United States forever. It's a beauty pageant that Trump took place. How is it related to Epstein files and all this stuff? But yet that's going to be spread. And I think in the United States, many people already realized that there is a fight between what we call globalists and capitalists. Globalists are represented, no, we can say Soros or whatever. That is media. 90% of media in Europe and the United States is to the left, and they're fighting Trump. They're not fighting Maduro. They're not fighting Al Qaeda. They're not fighting Putin. They're fighting Trump. And there's this capitalist world that is trying to withstand that, which is represented by Trump. And pretty much, I think it is very clear that there are only two problems in the world, and if we get rid of them, everything is going to be hunky-dory. It's Trump and Israel.
Joel, what is your take on this? Do you think that Trump is being critical because he wants the best for Europe, or is this part of a different strategy, perhaps?
I don't think Trump has Europe's best interests at heart at all. He's performing much like American presidents, particularly Republican presidents, have over the years in intervening in European affairs. For example, we just observed the anniversary of the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milano, here in Italy in 1969, which dozens of people, if I remember correctly, were killed by far-right terrorists associated with Italy's fascist movement. And in all of the court briefings about the incident, some of which remained ongoing until very recently, there was repeat allegations of U.S. intelligence support for the attacks because they were meant as part of a broader strategy to fight communism in Italy. The Americans have always taken a very proactive role in trying to maintain a certain kind of political character for Europe. That was the Kissinger era. Now we have Trump. And this is just another version of the same. What's different and more threatening, I think, about what Trump's trying to do now is, I could cite there was an article in Politico a week ago about the U.S. getting involved in European elections and trying to dictate their outcomes, according to President Trump's most recent initiative. And I think that this is going to be our version of the kind of intervention in European politics we saw during the Cold War under administrations like Nixon's.
Obviously, I see, Owen, you're ready to respond to this. How do you think that Trump's criticisms resonate with the European public versus political elites?
Look, Natasha, I think Trump can get things that are important to the United States, or he can talk about migration. I don't think he can do both, and I'll tell you why. Because to get the things that are important for the United States, like the defense spending, which he's already gotten, although the Europeans actually have to make good on their pledge. They've made the pledge. Now they actually have to come up with the money. And also to get what he wants on trade in the long run, to get what he wants on China in the long run. He needs to give the Europeans sticks, and he knows how to use those, and that has to be said to his credit, but he also knows how to take out the carrots. And the carrots are that the United States is going to be reliable for Europe. And if Trump comes in and he starts talking about migration over the head of at least parts of Europe and part of the European leadership and part of the European public, yes, it's true the far right is gaining in popularity, but there are a lot of people who don't like the far right and aren't with them. And the more that Donald Trump makes the United States look unreliable, the harder it is for him to be able to get Europe to make promises in the long term that are really important to the United States and its future geopolitically. Nothing more important than China. And they're an economic bloc like the European Union. It's going to be very important. Now, of course, the Europeans have their own reasons for being hawkish on trade with China. And we've seen that over the last few weeks, especially. But even so, Trump is going to want European cooperation on a range of issues. He's not going to get it if he shows the United States not to be reliable. And talking about migration is one sure way to get the United States to seem erratic and not reliable.
Well, I'll argue that because, again, if you look from a point of view from the United States, Europe does not have interests of Europe from our point of view in the beginning, and they want for us to have.
Let me, Gary. Let me just come in for a second. I want to ask you a very I want to ask you a very specific question.
I wasn't finished. Why does the
United States have an interest in how many migrants Germany admits into its country? Why does the United States care? Why is it an American national interest? How many migrants, or for that matter, let's say it explicitly, how many Muslims do live in Munich or don't?
Well, you clearly don't want to hear what I want to say, so
let me hear. Go for it.
Well, I wasn't finished with my first point, so you interrupted me. But it is a typical European way of approaching Americans, because we owe you something. We don't know what we owe you, but we clearly owe you, and we owe you explanations. We owe you apologies. We owe you other things. But I'll answer your question. The reason is because we're supposed to fight this evil second Hitler that's raising his head in your backyard, in Europe, and we're paying a lot of money. $350 billion was invested in it by American citizens and by American taxpayers, but Europe is not pulling its own weight. Europe is spending money on those immigrants rather than spending money on building their war machine, building their army, building their military that is capable of fighting off of it. And instead, they're investing it in immigrants. And we're saying, okay, if you want to invest in that, go ahead. We're not stopping you, but don't expect us to do anything about it. Don't expect us to fight your wars.
All right. Well, we have time for a quick response on that, OMB. We have to go out for a commercial break.
Yeah, I mean, it seems hard for me to believe that that's the problem, that's the reason that the Europeans weren't spending on debate long before migration, long before 2015, this was an issue.
Right, now it's an issue before that. But what you should believe is in God and not believe in what you believe in. What you believe in is not a factual statement. This is what I'm saying to you is what's on our news and why American people are upset about it. And they're saying that you used to call President Trump isolationist, that he was going to only worry about the United States. But now you're blaming him that he's not an isolationist, that he is involved in all of those things that are going around the world. So Trump cannot be right. Trump cannot be right no matter what he does. He's going to be blamed for everything.
Okay, but we're going out for a quick commercial break, but stick with us. We're going to continue this discussion soon. And we are back on Global. I am Natasha Kirchak, and thanks for sticking with us. Now, the European Union's plan to freeze and maybe even use Russian state assets is sparking outrage amongst some European leaders. Have a listen.
Brussels are crossing the Rubicon today. Today at noon, a written vote will begin that causes irreparable damages to the Union. The subject of the vote is the frozen Russian asset, on which the EU member states have voted every 6 months, and the decision was made unanimously. With today's procedure, the requirement for unanimity will be lifted by the people of Brussels with a stroke of a pen. It's obviously illegal. With today's decision in the European Union, the rule of law will be abolished, and European leaders will place themselves above the rules.
All right, we're going to turn back to our panelists tonight. We have retired U.S. Navy Captain Gary Tabach with us, the former Chief of Staff of NATO in Moscow. We have Joel Shalit with us, the Editor-in-Chief of The Battleground, and our very own Senior Correspondent, Owen Alterman. All right, remember, we're going to give each of you 30 seconds right now to give a quick answer to one of our fire rounds. This question is our next one. Is Orban right when he says that the EU is overstepping and could mess up Europe's reputation as a safe place for money? Joel?
Only if you're speaking on behalf of the Russians do you take such a position. The EU decision was legal. It was extensively vetted, and a majority, 27, I believe, member states voted on its behalf. So, voted to support the resolution freezing Russian assets. So, Orban is wrong.
All right, Gary, what's your take?
Well, trust me, I'm the one that would love to see that happen, and that would be a great thing to do. But I think things should be stay within the legal boundaries, and it should be decided by the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, by international lawyers, because you can't just come in and take something because you think these people are criminals or this guy is a bad guy, and just take the something that he lent you to hold for him. I think that is not right. I mean, and again, I'm a product of collective farms. And so every time you have a collective farm like NATO, European Union, and so forth, this is what happens. All of a sudden, they think they're above the law, and they know what's right and what's wrong, and they can do those things. For instance, one of the things that upsets a lot of people in the United States now is the fine that European Union smacked on Musk. What is 120 or 140 million dollars? But nobody can understand what is it that he's fined for, just because he's saying things that doesn't like, or his platform is not doing something. Nobody could give a clear explanation to it by any lawyers or any means. But European Union, their body decided, and that's it. That's the law.
All right, Owen, your 30 seconds now.
It's a calculated risk, Natasha. Look, the Europeans themselves aren't sure this is going to work. That's why all the governments have had to give ironclad guarantees to Belgium to get on board with this, because the Belgians are worried about that a judgment in Russia could be used against them in Belgium, that their own courts won't stand by them. That's how worried the Europeans are. But look, we're almost 4 years into this war. 4 years. We were talking before about how the Europeans need to step up and give the Ukrainians money. Okay, this is a way for them to do it, to get this money, to use as collateral for a loan for Ukraine, to be able to get this through, and ultimately, potentially, to have the Russians pay the Ukrainians this money as part of reparations. The Europeans are coming at this reluctantly, but almost 4 years into this war, this is a lot of money, and this is the rabbit that just needs to be pulled out of the hat.
All right, we're going to turn now to open panel, meaning that you'll have the chance to speak your mind. Let us know what you think. I see already that there was a response that one of you had to Owen. No? I misheard that. Okay. So, we were talking about Trump and his criticisms of Europe. Are they encouraging infighting within the bloc, especially in this specific scenario? Is this ultimately good for the United States, the potential that the bloc could break up?
Right now, opinion polls are firmly against Trump. He's been met with massive disapproval in the polling that I've read, leading a number of polls to conclude that Trump is a threat to Europe. How populist and far-right parties in the EU regard this is probably to ignore what the polls are saying and celebrate the fact that Trump is on their side, and they can take that and they can use that with their base to further inspire them and charge them up to take more initiatives to erode both the EU itself and democratic norms within their own national states.
Gary, what's your take?
Well, polls are polls. The same polls said that Trump is not going to win the first time, the second time, and the third time that he was going to lose. Also, Gallup poll, which is very much respected in Europe, saying that most of the Americans say that the most not trusted people are journalists. So I don't really see how polls are saying. But again, I'm a product of a collective farm of the Soviet Union. Every time you have that, it doesn't work. There is a bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy. Decisions are never made, just like the United Nations. And I tell you, those of us who served, and I've served in the United Nations and I've served in the NATO, and among ourselves, we call the United Nations useless nobodies, and NATO no action talk only. That is not me saying this. This is what it is with the people who are inside of those organizations. They're large, they're bureaucratic, and they have never resolved anything. They have never prevented anything. And I think in Israel, it is people know very well.
Owen, is this ultimately good for the United States, the potential that the bloc could break up?
Well, look, I'm going to push back against Joel here. Joel, to quote a good Italian, I know you're in Italy, Niccolo Machiavelli, Trump might not be loved, but he's feared. Look, he may not do well in polling among Europeans, and he may be pitting leaders against each other in the issue of migration, But again, the issues that are really important for the United States in terms of its interests, in terms of its world standing, in terms of achieving its actual bare knuckles goals on defense spending, on trade, potentially also in China, Donald Trump has brought European leaders around to him because they understood that he was really coming at them with real leverage. Of course, those gains might be fragile. They might be eroded by Donald Trump talking about migration and showing that the United States can't be relied on. But Trump has a lot of achievements with Europe. Look, Natasha, I don't think it's good for the United States if the European Union breaks up, but it's also not good for the United States if the Europeans are taking advantage of the United States or taking the transatlantic alliance for granted. There seems to be a kind of halo effect of putting the transatlantic relationship on a pedestal among establishments over the last few decades, and Donald Trump has broken that and basically said, yes, the relationship's important, but it's also important that you do things that are important to us. As a principle that's essential for the United States moving forward, now the question is, how do you take that forward and actually focus on things that are really important to you? Tying Europeans standing up for defense with standing with the Europeans against Russia and Ukraine. And there has been some evidence of some linkage to that in the last few months. And having the Europeans come around to the United States, or having the United States be more attentive maybe to the Europeans on trade in exchange for the Europeans, for example, being more attentive to the United States on China.
Where should...
Owen,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
you mind if I
Go
respond?
ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the United States helped set what became the Ukraine war rolling when George Bush in 2005 declared his support for the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. And that initiative was strongly supported at the time by Hungary, for example. There was a meeting in Budapest where all of this was affirmed. And Europe tagged along. The Americans took the initiative, and the Europeans followed suit. So, I mean, I think the U.S. in many ways owns the Ukraine conflict in unique ways that the Europeans don't. That's not to say that Europe didn't have its role in, supporting Euromaidan and the subsequent destabilization of the country in 2014, for example. But I think that it's really important, speaking from the European side, to clarify what Donald Trump's rights are to dictate the political order of Europe to Europeans. Donald Trump was not elected in Europe. Donald Trump was elected in the United States. He should stay there. And this is regarded in many quarters, including center-right quarters. You should talk to the former National Front, the Rassemblement National in France. They hate what Trump is doing, and they're on the very far right. There's an element of chutzpah here that is absolutely intolerable from a democratic point of view. And so it's hard to hear what good the Americans do at this level when so much of it is distinctly dictatorial.
All right, Gary, final comments.
This is Trump's fault when Vice President Biden calls Ukrainian president enacting and saying, give up Crimea. That's Trump's fault. I mean, everything starts with the Trump. But
it's not the same.
Today, right? No, right. It's all not the same. The thing is, you're saying that Trump should stay. You're absolutely correct. Trump was voted by American people and Americans, and he's American president, and he should stay. And this is exactly what we're saying. He should stay in America.
Yeah.
Then why are we Why are you discussing then Trump? If he should stay here, just stop discussing him, stop blaming him for everything, try to help him. And the thing is, that never stops. It's Trump that's fault. But while this war is going on, it started under the President Obama, the hot war with the Crimea, and it continued with the President Biden, both Democratic and the same party people that one replaced the other. It was not Trump. And it was Trump who's is the only one that's trying to stop this war. Why isn't any of the European leaders take the lead? Take the lead. He's not dictating you anything. Take the lead. But all it is just yap, yap, yap. And at the end, Trump is at fault. No matter what he does, he's at fault. So far, he's the only one that's showing leadership in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, and in South and North Americas. No other leader has taken a lead. And this is, I guess, it's very difficult to understand that he's an American president and he's the one that's taking responsibility for it. And that is why there is a fight. That is why everything is done. No facts at all placed. What has he done that harms Europe or anyone else? So far, he's trying to help everyone. And this is that's unsaid. It's better to talk about those things in a collective way. So if you want him to stay out of it, he'll stay out of it. Don't listen to him. Don't vote for him next time, Europe. But the thing is, you can't get your stuff together. You are actually in Europe are fighting against yourselves. Look what happened today in Australia, with the killings there. Why? You know what happens? It's the same thing happening in Europe. You have people running around with Palestinian flags saying down with Israel, down with the United States. The same thing was happening on our campuses. But as soon as President Trump came in and told those campuses they're not going to be financed by federal money, by taxpayers, that stopped in the United States. In the United States, is those two gunmen were like they are in Europe or they are in Australia now, they wouldn't have been shooting for that long, and they would have never shot that many people, because in Texas, after first shot, they would have been taken down, because our people are armed. Our American people, our citizens are armed, and we can protect ourselves. You guys cannot help yourself. You can't even protect yourself, but you expect Americans to do it. And we've done it. We've done it
right.
World War I, World War II.
Joel, did you have any last thing that you wanted to say to that?
Yeah.
I thought I had the last word.
You did until we decided that Joel had the right to respond to that long answer.
Right.
If you don't mind. I'm an Israeli immigrant who has lived in Germany and Italy for the last 17 years. And far-right governments are not friends to Jews. They tolerate Jews, but they are not our allies. Trump is enfranchising far-right parties in Europe that are anti-Semitic.
You have any examples for Jesus Christ on this? For Jesus Christ, Israel had never had a better friend than Trump. Never. One of the countries that never had a better friend than Trump, and you're putting him in the far right. And I'm an immigrant too in the United States. I was born in the Soviet Union. But it is the most bizarre thing that I've ever heard in my life.
All right.
Trump is
Guys,
not
unfortunately, we do have to leave it here. I'm going to have to cut off both of you. I see, Joel, that you want to respond as well, but we do have to move on to our next story.
That's good.
I'd like to thank our panelists so much for joining us. We weren't able to figure out what comes next for Europe, whether it's going to continue to become more unified as a result of Trump's comments, fragmented, or we're going to see a reshaping of the global order entirely. But we'd like to thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
I wonder if TDS is covered by Obamacare. That's not curable.
We're just going to end it right here.